Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie, and in this video I want to discuss the weekend of January the 24th and 25th 2026. First of all, I just wanted to mention some event that happened to me. This has really got nothing to do with astrology, I don't think. I mean, I had some sort of Aquarius planets pretty close to my sort of a square of my Mars and my ascendant, but it's very strange because things happen in America because I'm not American, and I like to sort of observe this country in which I'm living. But sort of an event happened yesterday. I'm making this recording on a Friday, on a Thursday, which would not have happened in the UK. So a box got dumped next to the property I'm living, close to the road. And it was just this green box, and it had been around for some time. And there's the question of, what is it? It seemed kind of suspicious. Why would someone dump a green box at the bottom of the property I'm in? So it's time to explore. So I open the box, and in the box, this doesn't sound particularly unusual, perhaps from an American perspective, but somewhat European from a British perspective, certainly rather alarming. So in the box was just several hundred rounds of ammunition. I mean, why would someone leave several hundred rounds of ammunition at the bottom of the road, at the bottom of the property next to the road? I mean, why? I mean, as far as I could see, I did a sort of chat GPT search. It looked like fairly cheap ammunition. Apparently it's rim fire. That means that however the gun works, it doesn't work via a firing pin at the base of the round, but it sort of hits the side, and that's how it works. It was sort of low caliber ammunition, but still, 200 rounds of ammunition. If that had been the UK, where someone had dropped 200 rounds of ammunition next to your property, that would be a major incident. So what does one do? So one calls the police, and a police car turns up and makes some inquiries. In fact, the owner of the box, his name was on it, so he was able to call the owner, check that he wasn't a felon, and then take the box away and return it to him. Who knows what happened? My guess would be that someone stole it. They opened this box and they saw all this ammunition. It was rimfire. It was low caliber. It doesn't fit most firearms, so they just wanted to dump it. Why dump it here? It's like they were dumping a piece of furniture. I don't know. Anyway, I thought I would share that with you. I did try to see what was going on astrologically. From my British perspective, it seemed like a dramatic event. From an American perspective, it was just a routine matter of returning lost property. So as far as other things going on, well, we've got a lot of stuff in Aquarius, and that's why I've titled this video Aquarius Overdrive, because Mars has just gone into Aquarius, and I do want to think about this Aquarius Overdrive at the end of this video, and I also want to ask the question, what does happen if you've got a lot of planets in Aquarius? What would happen, for example, if you had 7 of the traditional planets in Aquarius? Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. One has questions about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, but Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are in a different category. I don't think when one is thinking about balances and so forth, one needs to consider, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. These are the discovered planets that I think the key thing about Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. One of the key things is you can't really see them with the naked eye. There is some view that you can see Uranus with the naked eye, but certainly not Neptune and Pluto. And if you look at the ancients, they were not aware of Uranus. Although, again, there are some who say that the sort of ancient Indians, as in the Indian subcontinent, were aware of Uranus. I don't know about that, but that's perhaps part of the distinction. I did find someone who has all 7 planets: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, in Aquarius. And, what kind of person would they be like? I think there was an idea in the early 60s, because people were aware of that Aquarius. In the early 60s, there was a very big Aquarius conjunction. There was a time in the early 60s when all the 7 planets were in Aquarius, and I think maybe that had an inspiration for this idea about the age of Aquarius and the dawning of the age of Aquarius. And I think there were some ideas that, either that the Antichrist would appear with all those 7 planets in Aquarius, or perhaps even that the Antichrist were to be born at the beginning of 1962. So I wanted to look at the horoscope of someone who is, relatively famous. I mean, I'd never heard of him before. I sort of looked for this imaginary person, or no, I thought they were imaginary, not imaginary at all, for this person who had seven traditional planets in Aquarius. Maybe you had heard of him, but anyway, I will be looking at his chart. But before I do all that, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for the weekend, which is January the 24th and 25th, 2026. So here is the chart of the weekend. Don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So as far as exact aspects are concerned, it's not a particularly busy weekend. There's not a huge amount to report. In fact, you could argue that it's somewhat boring. I'm not saying it is going to be boring, but it's not that exciting. So turning to what is happening over the weekend. So here's a chart set for midnight on Sunday, January the 25th, New York time. The moon is in Aries, fairly sort of late Aries. That's my lunar return coming up. I've got my moon at something like 22, 23 Aries, something like that. So I've got my lunar return over the weekend. Lunar return conjunct Chiron. So Moon is conjunct Chiron. Moon is solidly in Aries through this weekend. Okay, Sunday it starts to well, not quite solidly. Sunday it does move into Taurus at 5 minutes past 6 in the evening on Sunday, London time. So that means lunchtime on Sunday. And if you're in New York, earlier if you're on the West Coast, the moon does move into Taurus. So there is a bit of a change right at the end of the weekend, but by and large, it's a moon in Aries weekend. What does the moon do in Aries? Well, right at the beginning of a weekend, the moon makes a sextile to Venus on a Saturday. Then it makes a square to Jupiter. So moon square Jupiter. That might be about perhaps pushing something a bit too far. Maybe overindulging oneself, or perhaps there might be a conflict between, the impulse of Moon in Aries, wanting to do something, wanting to create action, wanting to, be dynamic, and then Jupiter in Cancer representing a rather different force. Perhaps one has to consider other things, perhaps of a more sort of traditional nature. So there could be, with Moon square Jupiter, that could be an issue of conflict. Jupiter in Cancer wanting things perhaps to stay on an even keel, not wanting too much disturbance, and perhaps one thinks about the family and convention. I mean, that may be a way of looking at Jupiter in Cancer, but Moon in Aries perhaps has other ideas. So that's Saturday. Moving into Sunday, we've got Moon making a conjunction to Chiron, and then it changes sign, goes into Taurus. I mean, it's kind of good that the Moon moves into Taurus, because Moon is exalted in Taurus, and the first aspect the Moon makes when it moves into Taurus is a square to Mars. So you've got Moon square Mars at the end of a weekend. I mean that, and then of course as you move from Sunday to Monday, the Moon in Taurus will be aspecting all those Aquarius planets. So it's an aspect that can be a bit difficult. It can be a bit of stubbornness. Moon in Taurus, Mars and Aquarius, both in fixed signs, wanting to hold on to what they have, perhaps not being ready to compromise. But just looking at the weekend, overall, I don't think we we should expect too much to happen. From a theoretical point of view, of course, it's kind of likely that something will happen. Something always does happen, and although those conjunctions are breaking up, we still have a lot of planets in making aspects to each other. We've got Mars moving towards a conjunction of Pluto. We've got we've still got a Sun-Pluto conjunction. We've still got, in fact, you could say that what we have right now is just one big conjunction. We've got Mars. We've got an arc of planets. We've got Mars at 1 degree, 1 degree Aquarius. Venus at 9 degrees Aquarius. So they're within 8 degrees of each other. So there is a big conjunction here, and there might be something rather sort of single-pointed about the weekend. It may not be a weekend where there is too much variety. We may not want variety. We might just want to stick to one thing, hold on to what we have, and perhaps we're not looking for too many alternatives. In fact, alternatives might not be particularly welcome with all those planets in Aquarius. Though we've got Moon in Aries plus the Aquarius planets. Moon in Aries does provide a nice balance because Aquarius is an air sign. It can be just too much thinking, and having a fire sign creates a possibility of some action. Then there is a view from Sydney, Australia, as a representative of Australia, New Zealand, East Asia. All that we have here is we just have the moon earlier in Aries. That conjunction between the moon and Chiron isn't until the end of the weekend. The moon will move into Taurus. Well, will it move into Taurus? Not really. The moon definitely won't move into Taurus if you're in Australia and New Zealand. It's there's too far to go. So moon in Aries all weekend. It will make that square to Jupiter eventually. So there's not so much difference between Australia and other parts of the world. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. So here is the chart, and as far as this chart is concerned, the Earth is still opposition Pluto. It's 2 degrees apart, so there's still a sense of nervousness here. Issues of power could be quite important. Who has the power? Who doesn't have the power? Are we able to assert ourselves? Aside from that, Mercury is the action planet. Mercury is moving towards a conjunction of Venus. Mercury-Venus conjunction is always pretty good. As far as just looking at that conjunction from a geocentric point of view, just to make a comparison. So Mercury-Venus, you can see Mercury is making a conjunction to Venus geocentrically and heliocentrically, and that conjunction is, I would have said, pretty fortunate. It's quite talented. It's about being able to explain who we are and what we're good at, and if we were doing anything of an artistic nature with that Mercury conjunct Venus, we can be very effective, and we may have the ability to do something which is quite original, maybe sort of groundbreaking, perhaps because we're able to tune into all of this Aquarian energy, this Aquarian overdrive that I'll be talking about later in the video, although we don't want to exaggerate. Maybe it's not such a big deal that we've got all these planets in Aquarius. Maybe we're just, maybe we are indeed exaggerating. But I know some astrologers are, treating this Aquarian build-up as something absolutely exceptional. But maybe it's not. Maybe we're just making too much of a fuss about it. So anyway, let's now look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of January the 24th and 25th, 2026. Aries. It's perhaps time, Aries, to be different. I mean, you don't want to be different just for the sake of it, but you just might feel that you are different, that you see things in a way that is different than other people, and what concerns you isn't necessarily what concerns anyone else. And if something concerns you, then well, clearly you should express these concerns. It's not a time to just be sort of blending into the scenery, just becoming part of the furniture. I mean, you are an Aries after all, and the moon is moving through your sign, and we do have a lot of positivity right now. I mean, in terms of the personal planets, Sun through to Saturn. Sun through to, let's start again. Sun through to Mars. All of the personal planets are in positive signs, are in fire or air, and so that is quite motivating. And I think that with the moon in Aries making this conjunction to Chiron, you perhaps see yourself as being different. I mean, particularly on Sunday. And if you're feeling different, then that is something you need to do. You need to express that. And what makes you unique is perhaps your ability to be aware of things that just other people are just ignoring. And it might be easiest to say nothing, but if something is indeed bothering you, then I think you need to be open about it, and you need to be prepared to do things that other people aren't necessarily sympathetic towards. And that might be of a moral nature. It might relate to your fundamental compassion, or the things that make you angry. And so if you're angry about something, it's not just about sort of screaming your head off or anything like that. It's you respond to anger through your actions, and at the same time you perhaps disregard other people's sensitivities. Sometimes it's necessary to do that, because if you're overly concerned about what people are thinking and what people are feeling in particular, then well, you might get nothing done. But I don't think that that's a problem. And also, we've got all these planets in Aquarius, so do think about some of your associations, people you meet every day, and I mean it's a weekend, and if you are interacting with people, perhaps you need to hang out with different people. Perhaps certain people have got a bit boring, and you need stimulation, and you also need an audience. I mean, I think that is, in a sense, quite important for many Arians, having that audience. And you want to have people around you who do take you seriously, who are prepared to listen to you. And so, it might also be the case that I'm afraid that, familiarity breeds contempt. If someone has got too used to you, then they might not take you particularly seriously, because you've just been always around. But if you come across sort of new people, well, then that is different, and it's a question of perhaps you showing yourself to be, not just to be different, but perhaps also to be unique. And so things are changing, things have changed, and I think it's important that you're really at the center of things. Remember also that Neptune is getting very close to the Aries point. I mean, Neptune is on the verge of moving into your sign, and I wonder how you're feeling about that. I mean, you might think that Neptune moving into your sign is something negative. I mean, okay, it's true that Neptune can be difficult, but not necessarily. I think Bismarck was an Aries, and Bismarck became, I believe, Bismarck became Chancellor of Germany when Neptune moved into Aries. So Neptune moving into Aries might be about responsibility, and feeling that you have a responsibility to something beyond yourself, to something quite collective. I mean, I'll be talking about Neptune moving into Aries in my video for Monday, but it's certainly something that you need to be aware of. Taurus. There is quite a lot happening at the moment. I mean, in terms of just this mass of Aquarian planets, having 5 planets in Aquarius. I mean, I talked about it yesterday and on Friday. I mean, and I do think that this weekend is possibly a continuation of Friday. I mean, on Friday we have the moon in Aries. Saturday, a lot of Sunday, the moon is still in Aries. So it could just be just a continuation of old work, old concerns. And so as far as how this thing might express itself, you yourself don't really want to be too heavily involved. I think you would rather just do nothing, or if you are doing something, you want to do it in a way that isn't really noticed. And certainly that is something you can do, and I think it's about not being noticed rather than not doing anything. There are things that you can do, in your own way. The weekend starts with a sextile between the moon and Venus. Remember, Venus is your ruler. So with moon sextile Venus, you have a chance to do something that just feels important to you, and it might be just quite unique. It really does matter, but it's not necessarily anything you want to talk about, and it might also relate to your desires and your ambitions, and the whole way in which you are heading. And so if you're heading in a particular direction, then you could say, well, maybe just keep going, but don't necessarily advertise the fact. And there might be something that you had been doing on Friday that just continues into the weekend, and maybe you hadn't finished it on Friday. And so as you move into Saturday, you just want to keep working on it. And I think that that would be fine. And I said at the beginning of this video, when I was talking about the overall planetary positions, that there is something rather single-pointed about what's going on today, because we've got these 5 planets in Aquarius. I mean, I'll be talking about these 5 planets in Aquarius later in the video in more detail when I talk about Aquarian Overdrive, but this weekend is just a reminder perhaps of your own obsession, the fact that there are certain things you just regard as being incredibly important, and you just can't let go of it. And I mean, you might try to just socialize normally and talk to people and pretend that nothing's going on, but are you going to be completely relaxed? And I think the answer might be no, just because you will be constantly thinking about something that's important. And if you're with other people, part of you might be thinking, well, you'd rather be somewhere else, unless you're doing something that is relevant, relevant to your own aims, your own targets, your own desires, and so perhaps you should arrange your weekend around what is important to you. If you try to be accommodating, you agree to something that you don't really want to do, then you're not going to be particularly happy or satisfied, and you're not going to be the life and soul of the party. So I would stick to your own priorities, and in that way, I think that things should be okay. I mean, I think things are going to be okay anyway. And at the end of a weekend, the moon does move into Taurus, and when the moon moves into Taurus, it makes a square to square to Mars. And I think by the end of the weekend, you're going to suddenly become quite determined. You really will get that determination back if you ever lost it, by the end of a weekend. And with Moon square Mars, it just might be that there's just something you absolutely need to do before the beginning of the new working week, perhaps. And Moon square Mars is, you're not going to want anyone to get in your way. So with Moon square Mars, I would have said at the end of a weekend, do be careful with other people. Don't do something that you don't want to do. That's especially important at the end of a weekend, because that Moon square Mars could cause friction. On the other hand, if you treat that Moon square Mars well, then it could be quite dynamic. It could really just allow you to really move forward, and in a slow way, but fairly slow way. Moon in Taurus, square Mars in Aquarius, slow, persistent way. And that means that you can, perhaps end the weekend feeling that, you are going in the right direction, and that you haven't been too badly distracted. Gemini. Still a lot of planets in Aquarius, and there will be a lot of planets in Aquarius. I think we've got these five planets, 4 personal planets plus Pluto in Aquarius, I think until about February the 10th, something like that. And with these Aquarian planets, you perhaps have an opportunity to go beyond yourself. I mean, that certainly can happen, and you're just not entirely satisfied with the way things are, with the way things are presented. And maybe this becomes particularly clear over the weekend. I mean, it could have been happening sort of later in the week, on Friday, but now the weekend, you really want to just to sort of move beyond things. And I think that that is something you can do, and I think that you're going to be helped by the fact that the moon is in Aries. It's all very well to have lots of ideas. Gemini is an idea sign, so it's great to have lots of ideas. But ideas on their own I'm sure ideas on their own are really of limited value. They don't get you anywhere, and that's particularly the case if you are a Gemini. And so with these planets in Aries, they can be really quite with this moon in Aries, that can be quite stimulating. And it may be that with moon in Aries, that stimulation might come from other people. Maybe on your own, you can't do much, but with moon in Aries, you get the boost you need. And so perhaps you should try make some effort to be sociable and see who is around. But in the process, you should prepare to be challenged. I mean, the moon is conjunct Chiron. That suggests that there are people out there who have very strong views. They have strong ideas about the way things should be done. It's not just ideas; they want action. And perhaps action is what you need. I mean, it's all very well to have fantasies about what you could be doing and where you could be going, but where is the reality? And I think that maybe these planets in Aquarius, it can just be taken too far. And so at some stage you just need a little bit of stimulus, and that stimulus is most likely to come from other people. And so that's that's a broad idea about what's happening. I mean, the moon does eventually go into Taurus, and so right at the end of a weekend, the moon moves into Taurus, and so when the moon moves into Taurus, perhaps things will quieten down quite quickly. So the weekend might start being quite busy, things definitely going on, and then there is quiet, and you perhaps feel some need to withdraw, and so as you move into the new week, as you move into Monday, things might just be somewhat slower. But there is also a possibility of some kind of challenge. You ask yourself, what is it all about? Where are you supposed to be going, Gemini? And we can talk about all of these Aquarius planets, but we can also think about Saturn and a North Node, Saturn and North Node in Pisces, and that means that despite this Aquarius emphasis, perhaps what matters is fundamentally your direction. You definitely have a direction that you should be moving towards. You should be moving towards it, but you kind of also know where you're going wrong. You know where you're getting distracted. But if you're a Gemini, you can see yourself getting distracted, but that doesn't necessarily mean you do anything about it. You just sort of give in to the distraction. And so this might also relate to some of your ideas about how you'd like things to be. You might have wonderful ideas, fantastic ideas, and it is even possible that you might meet people who share these ideas, who share these principles, who are looking for something new and exciting. But is it necessarily right? And I think that something needs to pull you back, and you perhaps don't want to exaggerate, don't want to be over ambitious. You've got to keep it real, and I think that may be part of what's happening over the course of a weekend. Wanting a lot of variety, but there's just something pulling you, reminding you that you can look for all the variety you want. That's great. But the actual path, your path, is always there. It's the same path. It's not going away. And that might be tough for many Geminis. Geminis, they like things that are novel, but the basic road ahead is the same. It's not going to change. I mean, you might like it to change, and maybe you can change your approach or your style, but it still comes back to that same path. And I think you need to recognize that, because otherwise you could waste a lot of time, and you could cause yourself in the end quite a lot of aggravation. You know what you're supposed to be doing, Gemini. Just do realize that. Cancer. For most of a weekend, the moon is moving through Aries, then it moves into Taurus. So with moon moving through Aries, it's quite a high-profile place for the moon to be, and it may relate to basically how you should be presenting yourself. There's always a way to present yourself. Now, some Cancerians, might be of the view that, why, it's a weekend. There's nothing to be done. Particularly if you're not working over the weekend, day of rest or days of rest. But still, with the moon in Aries, you've got something to do. You've got something to contribute. You've got something to present, and so don't feel that you can necessarily hide, because I think there's something that needs to be given out, something that perhaps needs to radiate. People maybe need to be inspired, and they need not just inspired, but maybe they need to be activated. Some people are being a bit slow and they're not being dynamic enough, and you yourself can really sort of get things going. And in the process, you might have to cause a bit of a shock. The moon is making a conjunction to Chiron. I mean, okay, Chiron is in Aries. It's going to be in Aries for some time, but with the moon making a conjunction to Chiron, and the moon is making a square to Jupiter. So I think that those two aspects, yeah, they're certainly dynamic, but they're also, I would have said, fortunate. And so Cancer, you can very much present yourself and your ambitions, and make it clear that maybe something needs to be done. And if you're being resisted, other people have other ideas, it's perhaps a good idea to hold firm. I think that if you get yourself into some kind of conflict, I think you're going to be okay. I think you're going to be able to give as good as you get, and in the end, Cancer, I think your will can eventually prevail. You can make it clear who you are, what's important, and I think that in the end, other people will just follow your example. I mean, so that is the main emphasis over the weekend, I think. And towards the end of the weekend, the moon does change sign, moves into Taurus, but moon, when it moves into Taurus, it makes a square to Mars in Aquarius. So I think that you continue to be dynamic even once the moon changes sign. Okay, when the moon changes sign, moves into Taurus, maybe you slow down a bit. Maybe it's not quite so important that you present yourself, that you show leadership. Maybe not quite so important, but still, there could be aggravations at the end of a weekend. Something you notice that perhaps isn't right. Maybe it's to do with another person's behaviour. You just feel, well, that's a bit off, and you take note of it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to show your feelings, but you can certainly be aware of how things are changing. So Cancer, I think that this weekend is a weekend when you should do as much as you can to project yourself, and you've definitely got something to offer. And just because it's a weekend, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to slow down. Leo, you're feeling pretty good by and large. I mean, I think it helps that the moon is in Aries, and finally you've got a planet in a fire sign, and the moon in Aries is it starts a weekend by making a sextile to Venus. So moon sextile Venus is a fairly easygoing aspect. It's an aspect that could say something about relationships, how you get on with other people. I think right now you can get on pretty well with other people, particularly at the beginning of a weekend. And so at the beginning of a weekend, try to be with people, try to talk to them, see if there's anything going on. It could be right now, for example, or at least at the beginning of a weekend, you just might have a need for excitement and for variety. And with moon sextile Venus, you might get that, and maybe it's a case of other people being ready for something new. Perhaps this something new is a thing that you can provide, and do listen to other people's ideas. So if you're not sure what to do, I think someone else certainly is sure what to do, and then perhaps you can then provide the action. So don't feel that you're alone. I think when you're in a group, or certainly it doesn't have to be in a group, when you're with another person, there is something going on, and so I think that it can be quite an interesting weekend, but I don't think necessarily a dramatic weekend. I mean, we don't have loads and loads of aspects going on, with outer planets. It may just be a bit low key. I mean, we do have moon conjunct Chiron, and with moon conjunct Chiron, this might just give you an opportunity to see things just beyond your immediate sphere, to be aware of what's happening elsewhere, and if things aren't right, if things are wrong, I think that might be something you pick up on. Everyone has a value system. You have a value system, and it's possible that over the course of a weekend you notice something that offends this value system. And if you're offended, what are you going to do about it? Well, you can maybe take a stand, or certainly you might have a chance to express your opinions. Now, at the end of a weekend, the moon does move into Taurus, where it makes a square to Mars, and that square to Mars might say something about your ambitions and your desires, and you're perhaps thinking ahead to the new week, and it just might occur to you that something or even someone is holding you back. Now, it may be about your thoughts. You're thinking about the future, you're thinking about work, you're thinking about your plans, and Moon Square Mars just can be a moment of irritation, where you see how things could be, and you also realize that things that you're being held back, and then there's a question of what you do about it. And it may be because it's maybe a Sunday evening, there's nothing you actually can do about it, but it's possible you make a resolution. But if you do make any resolutions late in the weekend, make sure that they're reasonable, and you don't want to assume a conflict where none exists. Virgo, I think that you're able to see the underlying picture at the moment. And it occurs to you, maybe, Virgo, that things are slightly complicated. I mean, you'd like things, of course, to be straightforward, but you can't just sort of exist on the surface all the time. I mean, I'm not saying you do exist on the surface all the time. I'm just saying that you sometimes have to be aware of what really is going on. And with this conjunction between Moon and Chiron, which you could say the Moon Chiron conjunction, is the main thing going on over the weekend. It may be that just something bothers you. Something bothers you at sort of quite a deep level, and you feel you would like to do something about it. But the question is, what are you going to do about it? I think it may be just a case of making a resolution. I don't think that there's necessarily anything you can do about it, though it is possible that you are concerned by another person's behavior or their reaction. What is someone presenting? What is someone presenting, for example, from a moral perspective? Maybe someone is doing something which just feels wrong. Maybe it's someone very close to you, and you hear what they're saying, you watch what they're doing, you see what they're doing, and maybe you don't like it. And are you necessarily dealing with something really bad? No, that's not true. But I think that at some level it might be quite easy to offend you. And so there is that question about whether you're right to be offended, or maybe you just need to be more open-minded and try to understand things from another person's perspective. And that's something you can do, if you make the effort. So before jumping to conclusions, try to think it through. And maybe you might just get some insights before Neptune leaves Pisces. Neptune has been in your opposite sign, Pisces, for quite a long time, on and off, and Neptune is getting ready to move into Aries. I think it moves into Aries on Monday, and so while Neptune is in Pisces, there's always that possibility of being confused by another person, misinterpreting what you see. So that might be just a good reason, not to jump to conclusions. And I think that would matter. Now, right at the end of a weekend, the moon does move into Taurus. It moves out of Aries into Taurus, and I think with the moon moving into Taurus, at some level, you become less intense and perhaps more open-minded, and that might sound strange. Taurus has a reputation for being quite a focused sign, which can be quite closed to alternative views as a sign. I'm not saying anything about Taurians there, but with the moon moving into Taurus, you just perhaps become more aware of possibilities. And moon does make a square to Mars, right at the end of a weekend, and there might be a conflict here, at the end of a weekend, between what you'd like to do and what you feel you must do, and somehow you have to sort that conflict out. You have obligations, and there are things that can't be left to chance, that you've got to deal with. On the other hand, you want to see things in a new way. You want to move to the next level, and so you've perhaps got to take the view that if you want to move forward, you've got to make sure that your existing space, where you are right now, that's all in order. And that might be annoying, but I think that at the end of a weekend, I think that you should be able to sort it all out. Libra. There is an interesting aspect going on over the weekend, and that is a semi-sextile between Venus and the North Node. So, Venus is, of course, in Aquarius. The North Node is in Pisces. So that might represent a certain conflict between the Aquarian and the Piscean principles. And we're dealing with a semi-sextile. So semi-sextiles are not like squares, where there is a definite conflict. There's more a feeling that you've got two things which don't quite relate to one another. So Venus is in Aquarius right now. Great place for Venus to be in. Venus in Aquarius can really enjoy itself. You can feel your own power. Hopefully, you can feel the power of your own creativity, and you can express this power. In a quite sort of major way. Now, this Venus in Aquarius is semi-sextile the North Node. So North Node in Pisces, well, that's a slightly different energy. It's perhaps about making sure that everything has been done properly. That the basic order and organization of things is all hanging together. And so with this Venus semi-sextile, the North Node, there is a certain feeling that you would love to just really just be yourself and have fun and feel that you're at the center of things, but something is bothering you. And so the question here is, Libra, is that, what do you have to do? What do you have to do to prepare the ground? And so it may just be that you have to kind of make sure that you're in the right place, that if you want to do something, you make sure that you're not going to just cause trouble by taking things too far, and having a responsible and organized approach, but also just being yourself. You can be yourself, you can express yourself fully, but in the process, you're not going to upset anything, and you're not going to ignore your various responsibilities, whatever those responsibilities might be. So that might be a way in which you can use this Venus semi-sextile the North Node. And additionally, today, of course, this weekend, we have got the Moon moving through Aries for most of the weekend. Okay, maybe all of the weekend. Certainly until late on Sunday. That is when the Moon moves out of Aries and into Taurus. So with the Moon in Aries, particularly the beginning of the weekend, Moon sextiles Venus at the beginning of the weekend. That can say something about other people, can say something about relationships. And with Moon in Aries, it does seem that certain people have definite ideas. There are things they want to do, and perhaps they want to do them now. And so you might be dealing with other people's impulsiveness. And I think that people are going to be quite open and honest, and I think they might also be open and honest about what is bothering them, what is wounding them. I mean, Moon is making a conjunction to Chiron on Sunday. I think it's Sunday. It depends on your time zone. But with Moon in the same sign as Chiron, people are quite free in terms of talking about what is bothering them, what is upsetting them maybe. And from your perspective, it might be slightly irritating, but maybe when people are expressing themselves, perhaps expressing their irritation, your first impulse might be not to be too happy about the situation, but you might be able to learn from it. You might hear some criticism, you might hear some complaints, and then you're thinking about whatever it is that you are trying to achieve, whatever it is that you're trying to get together, and you might become aware of possibilities. So perhaps with other people, your first impulse is to think that they're raising issues that you just don't want to deal with. But if you can be reasonable and try to understand their perspective, you might be able to learn from it. It might help you develop. I mean, I suppose from my view, of course, I have to read all the comments on my YouTube channel, and people tend to be fairly complimentary on my YouTube channels. I'm honest, maybe they're just being polite, but sometimes I get some genuine criticism, and I think that I try to take on board that criticism. Sometimes the criticism is not reasonable. Very often it is reasonable, and I try to accept it and maybe change. And I don't want to project anything onto you, but I mean, I think it's perhaps like this with you. You have to think about what people are saying, what people are presenting, and if you come across a criticism or come across an obstacle presented by another person, don't immediately just get upset about it. Think that someone's trying to sort of bring you down. It's not necessarily the case. So, in terms of your ambitions, whatever your ambitions might be, I think that there is a possibility that you can learn from other people, and perhaps you can even learn from other people's constructive criticism. Scorpio. There are at the moment a lot of planets in Aquarius, as I've been saying, and I must emphasize this, that between now and I think it's February the 10th, we have got 5 planets in Aquarius, and that is quite intense. And from your perspective, Scorpio, it may actually be quite anchoring. It brings you down to earth. Now, Aquarius is not a particularly down to earth sign, although I think of all of the earth signs, all of the air signs. Aquarius is probably the one that is most grounded, that is most earthy. I mean, you might disagree with that. I'm pretty sure about that. Maybe it's because Aquarius is a fixed sign, and maybe one associates fixity with Earth, but one shouldn't associate fixity with Earth. The cardinal fixed mutable way of looking at signs is just completely different from the four elements. But it just feels maybe with those 5 planets in Aquarius that something is indeed bringing you down to Earth, and it's perhaps a time that you don't want too much change. And now that it's a weekend, this really becomes clear to you. You want to hold to what you have, and not drift into speculative thinking or do something that you don't enjoy, or something that seems to be unstabilizing. That is not what you want. And so with these 5 planets in Aquarius, it's probably a time perhaps when you should be quite sort of independent minded and work things out in your own way. And it might in a way be your sort of deep winter. I mean, that's not really to do with the seasons, of course. If you're in the southern hemisphere, it's not the winter, it's the summer, but still it might nonetheless be symbolically the winter, the time when you're at the lowest point, not as in like depressed, but lowest point in terms of the kind of energy you're putting out. And you're thinking about the seed germinating, at the very bottom of the horoscope, you could say, because Aquarius is at the very bottom of the horoscope in a Scorpio chart. And so things perhaps need to develop in the darkness, and perhaps you need to develop in the darkness. It's not a time when you should necessarily be talking too much or discussing your plans, especially now that Mars has gone into Aquarius, and with the moon also in Aries. Aries is a sign that the average Scorpio sometimes finds it difficult to relate to, and Aries is just saying that you need to take time to just understand what is happening. And if it's a typical weekend, now might be the perfect opportunity. And then when there isn't so much pressure, when you can largely do the things that you feel that you need to do. Now, the moon does change sign right at the end of a weekend. The moon moves out of Aries and it moves into Taurus. And so moon moving into Taurus is a placement which unavoidably can be about other people. Other people, you have your doubts about many other people. I mean, you kind of don't want to be disturbed, but then with moon moving into Taurus, there may be certain people you have to deal with, not just late on Sunday, but but into the new week, into Monday. And the first thing the moon does when it moves into Taurus is it makes a square to Mars. So moon square Mars might represent something from the outside bothering you, maybe another person bothering you, and you don't want to engage, but maybe you have to engage. And maybe the challenge, particularly at the end of a weekend, is to just keep your cool. Perhaps you have to do something almost through gritted teeth, but you have to do it. You have to perhaps listen to what another person is saying. And some people don't go away, and some people are unavoidable. Might be members of your family or someone you just know really well who's just always there. So at the end of a weekend, a bit of patience and tolerance might be in order. Sagittarius. Well, this weekend we have got the moon moving through Aries, and while it's moving through Aries, it does make a square to Jupiter, and this square to Jupiter, well, actually makes a conjunction to Moon, makes a conjunction to Chiron, and a square to Jupiter. Jupiter is an important planet, certainly an important planet for you because it's your ruler, and so with the Moon making a square to Jupiter, you may feel a certain conflict between, on one hand, what you want to do and what you should be doing. Now, I don't want to talk about shoulds. I mean, that's not my job to tell you what you should be doing. But, I'm talking more about your subjective feeling. I'm certainly not going to tell you what you should be doing. But I think you have perhaps an idea at the moment that there is a difference between your natural, there's your natural impulse, and then there is your concept of, morality, or what is expected of you. And so there is a difference, and that might mean, Sagittarius, that there could be times over the weekend where you feel slightly guilty, particularly if you're doing something that's giving you pleasure. You might be thinking, well, is that the right thing to be doing? So there is this question about how you deal with that. Obviously, you shouldn't feel guilty. Maybe there are ways of really enjoying yourself, but in such a way that is in accord with your concept of responsibility. And so it may be that when you are really expressing yourself, when you are expressing yourself freely, you are also expressing yourself as a moral person, and maybe they're one and the same, and you have to recognize that. And so freedom of expression and personal morality, they can definitely accord with one another. And Sagittarius is a moral sign. Every Sagittarius has their own sense of right and wrong. Now, those senses of right and wrong can be completely different, but it's always there. It's true that a fair few dictators are Sagittarians. Franco in Spain, Pinochet was a Sagittarian, Stalin was a Sagittarian. These people have a moral code, but it might not seem obvious. But just because someone has a moral code, by the way, doesn't mean it's good. But every Sagittarian at some level has a concept of right and wrong, which is very immediate. It's not something that has to be worked out. I mean, at least when it's working well. So you just might naturally feel that you can do something that is just clear, obvious. With this moon square Jupiter, and there might be moments where you're having your doubts, but the moon is conjunct Chiron, and so that does indicate, with moon conjunct Chiron, that you can really do something that is fundamental to yourself. It's original, and it's also perhaps compassionate, and there is perhaps a feeling of compassion here, and maybe that's the key to working out that square between Moon and Jupiter. If you are compassionate, if you're caring, not caring just for the sake of it, but because it is fundamental to you. So that may be a way of approaching the weekend. And also, I think that with these planets in Aquarius, you're going to have really not much of a problem in terms of expressing yourself. Telling everyone who you are, what's important to you, and you can demonstrate that you are someone who is really quite sort of independent-minded, especially now that Mars is moving into Aquarius. You can do things which show yourself to be an individual. I mean, intellectually an individual, but also an individual from a moral and ethical perspective. Capricorn, I think this weekend you have everything you need. I don't think you need to go out of your way to find anything else, to find anything different. It's all basically in front of you. So I think that you can just proceed in your own way, and I don't think that you need to go out of your way. So whatever your plans for the weekend, I mean, I think that you can sort of keep them low profile. I think that you'll enjoy doing things that you are fairly familiar with, and you don't have to go out of your way. Now there is a conjunction between the moon and Chiron, and so with the moon conjunct Chiron, you might have thoughts about where you are living, and how does it feel, and there may be things about your living arrangements which maybe aren't perfect. They could have been done better, they could have been done more efficiently, but the question is, how concerned are you? Again, I don't think this is a weekend where you have to do anything, so that's good. But don't necessarily feel sorry for yourself if things aren't perfect. And it could be also with this moon conjunct Chiron that you have a strong sense of your own independence. I mean, Chiron is quite an independent-minded energy, and so you might not take kindly to being bothered or disturbed. I mean, one aspect we have over the weekend, aside from a moon conjunction between the moon and Chiron, is a square between the moon and Jupiter. So, Jupiter's in Cancer, Jupiter's in your opposite sign, and so Jupiter might represent pressure from elsewhere, pressure from outside, someone wanting to do something, trying to do something to get your attention, and this is not necessarily something you want to do. But then on the other hand, Chiron is an energy that can be quite compassionate. So maybe you're torn between on one hand your desire to be helpful, to help other people if they've got a problem, be there to sort it out, and on the other hand, a certain sense of independence, because I think that is a feature of the weekend, feeling that there are things you want to look at, there are things you want to do, and why should you worry about other people and outside pressure? But if pressure is going to be there, pressure is going to be there, and it might be that if you're spending a lot of time at home, you have to deal with your family and other things in your home which might make you feel, as I said earlier, a bit sorry for yourself. So that's all of that is certainly a possibility. Now at the end of the weekend, the moon changes sign. The moon moves out of Aries and it moves into Taurus. The moon moves into an earth sign. That is perhaps something of a relief. It has all got a bit single-pointed, all these planets in air signs in Aquarius. Aquarius is, of course, a sign next to Capricorn, but it's not always easy having to deal with, Aquarius, because Aquarius, is a sign which is ruled by Saturn, and of course Capricorn is ruled by Saturn as well. So Aquarius might be slightly problematic because you can, at one level, identify with the sign Aquarius because it's Saturn ruled, but it's Saturn in a different way. It's just rather more active than what you're used to, and so you are uncomfortable to some extent with these planets in Aquarius. But now the moon moves into an earth sign. It provides an antidote to some of the sort of abstraction and intellectualizing of Aquarius. And so with the moon moving into Aquarius, as you at the end of the weekend into the beginning of the new week, you're feeling more capable, and you're able to sort of get things together, and in general be more focused on the things that you enjoy. And moon in Taurus, well, there can be a certain sensuality to moon in Taurus, in potentially enjoying the good things in life. I mean, Gemini is an earth sign, and being in touch perhaps with the earthy pleasures, although, moon does make a square to Mars, moon square Mars, you might still feel that, that something is kind of in your way, because the thing is that when the moon moves into a Taurus, it just makes all these aspects to, these Aquarian planets. And so maybe you don't want to think too much. If you want to enjoy moon in Taurus, if you think too much, you analyze too much, or you listen too hard to what other people are saying, well, that might spoil things. So maybe you've somehow got to disentangle yourself from that, and really focus perhaps on the good things in life, and enjoying yourself, perhaps in quite an earthy way. Aquarius. So this video, I'm really thinking about Aquarius, and I've sort of titled this video sort of Aquarius Overdrive, because there are a lot of planets in Aquarius, as I think I said yesterday. You got Mars has now moved into Aquarius, and all of these Aquarian planets are kind of 5 planets, four personal planets plus Pluto in Aquarius. It certainly gives you a great deal of strength, and you are able to move forward, and there is no doubt about who you are, and what you can achieve. And so that's great, but you don't want to take things too far. There is some danger of a touch of extremism here with those 5 planets in Aquarius. I mean, that is perhaps the problem with 5 planets in Aquarius. These planets in a fixed sign, just it's too much. And if you just focus on one thing too much, if you focus on one thing too much, you might forget other things, and things might get lost, or you might lose your attention might stray, and you might end up perhaps discounting other people. I mean, other people do matter, and perhaps that's another problem with all these planets in Aquarius. Because it is reflected in Leo. So you've got Leo, which is this sort of empty sign. And so how do other people fit in with no planets in Leo? Leo is a sign that often does represent other people, relationships, and so forth. And if everything is focused on yourself, well, it might all sort of collapse in on itself. And so maybe Aquarius, when it gets so strong, it jumps to the opposite. And so you might feel that you need a balance, that perhaps you need another person to talk to, another person to reflect things back, because it's just, you've got a lot to bear, a lot to think about. And so getting the right person to listen to what's on your mind, perhaps to provide some gentle criticism, wouldn't be such a bad thing. Of course, it's got to be the right person, and it may appear to some people that you're just too focused, you're too single-minded, and that you perhaps need to relax a bit. But on the other hand, it is an opportunity. If there's something important in your life and you want to give it everything, then I think you can, and you can be very good at it. And Mars having moved into Aquarius, that certainly gives you focus. And I think that Mars may represent your ambitions. And so it is the weekend. Supposedly things are slowing down, but I don't think you're really slowing down. And there may just be one thing or a couple of things that are really, really important to you, and you just want to really focus on them all weekend long. And if that's what you want to do, then so be it. And I think that if you want to complete something and just do a really good job of it, then I certainly think you can. And also, you're going to be able to talk about it as well, if need be. So that goes back to reflection. You need sometimes to have a sounding board for whatever's on your mind, and that sounding board it's there if you look hard enough for it. And I think that you should, if you try, find it easy to, sort of communicate in quite a spontaneous way. You can say what's on your mind. You can speak. People will listen, and hopefully you'll be able to listen as well. I mean, I think listening could be quite important this weekend, because all those planets in Aquarius might not want to listen, but perhaps they should be listening. I mean, you have to function in the outside world. You have to deal with society, and as an Aquarius you can deal with society, but sometimes you could just get too wrapped up in yourself, and so that just would be one of the dangers of the 5 planets in Aquarius. But maybe the moon in Aries will provide some sort of dynamism from somewhere else, and so you can get an idea about what's going on in other people's minds and how best to relate to the collective and to society in general. Pisces. I'm not convinced, Pisces, that it's going to be a particularly spectacular weekend. I mean, there's not a huge amount going on. I mean, the moon is no longer in your sign; it's in Aries, and I think that you might feel that something is just missing. But I mean, I wouldn't worry about it. I mean, one aspect we have is Moon square Jupiter. I mean, Moon square Jupiter is the aspect that affects you. So what might that be about? You might try to create something out of nothing with that Moon square Jupiter. You might feel that you want to just create action, do something, anything. It might involve, for example, spending money. You spend money on something because you want something back. It's not because you necessarily need to spend money. It's because you want to create an impression. And that's certainly one way of looking at Moon square Jupiter. Moon square Jupiter might also be that there is something of a financial nature that is just irritating. It just annoys you, and you don't really want to have to deal with it, but perhaps you have to deal with it. It may be because you've made a mistake. It may be because someone else has made a mistake. Something may just come to mind which bothers you, and it's kind of annoying. And also with Moon conjunct Chiron, some Pisceans might feel ever so slightly sorry for themselves in a financial sense. So that's one way of looking at this conjunction. And as far as other things are going on, you've got planets all these planets in Aquarius. I mean, okay, they stay in Aquarius. You're going to have 5 planets in Aquarius until about February the 10th. I mean, then planets start moving into Pisces. But then, that's next month. I think just right now, it is a weekend, Pisces. I'm not convinced that there's a great deal that you're going to want to do, and maybe that's just the way it should be. I mean, at the end of a weekend, the moon does move into Taurus, and so with the moon moving into Taurus, you might feel that you have more freedom. There are new possibilities to do things. Maybe the financial side of things won't be such a bother, and you can be more relaxed. And so as you move into the new week, as you move into Monday, moon will move into Taurus. It will make squares to the Aquarian planets, but perhaps you have a better chance to be able to sort of understand what is happening around you, because this weekend you feel just ever so slightly out of sorts, and it is just bothering you to some extent. And one aspect we have, it's a minor aspect, that Venus is semi-sextile the North Node. Remember, the North Node is in Pisces. It's in your sign. And as I keep saying about the North Node in Pisces, it's about you doing the right thing and focusing on what is important to you, putting yourself first. But semi-sextile Venus, it is possible that that Venus represents someone else, an outside influence, someone who you're inclined to pay attention to, but perhaps you shouldn't. Maybe someone is winding you up on an emotional level. You're paying someone too much attention, and instead you should be thinking about yourself. But it may not be an either-or thing. It could be about accepting another person's role in your life without abandoning your core priorities, without forgetting about, yourself and your individualism, your individuality, and your freedom of action. So that's it with the astrology, with the 12 signs at least. And now I want to switch to the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 62, which is the taming power of the small. And this kind of reflects what we saw with the astrology. And with the astrology, I was really saying that it's not a huge amount going on this weekend, and perhaps not a weekend to write home about. So with the taming power of the small, you perhaps need to just streamline things, make things more straightforward. It's not a time for big ideas, big ambitions. Yeah, you can have these ambitions, but you shouldn't really put them into practice. You should stick to what you know. You should stick to what you trust, and don't be ambitious. And don't be too ambitious. And if you've got a choice, then probably go for the easiest one. Perhaps a choice which has the least rewards. Perhaps a choice that is least exciting. I mean, one view, for example, if you've got two people that you want to spend time with, you can spend time with this person or you can spend time with that person. Spend time with a person who is least effort. Perhaps with a person who is most boring. The person who is exciting but hard to manage should perhaps be avoided. If you've got a choice of going to two venues, one is perhaps a bit more risque, it might be more vibrant, or you've got one which you've seen it before, and it's not necessarily going to be that interesting. Then always go for the choice which is most boring and least risky, and that should be perhaps a guide to the weekend. And so that you do that, and then you're not going to get into too much trouble, and you're not going to get into any trouble, I don't think. And so just be aware of your duty, and restraint is certainly going to be important. Now, the top line moves, and the top line is a warning. The top line is suggesting you might take something too far. You might go past the point of no return, and you're kind of going against the natural order. You go against the natural order, and that just immediately creates problems, all sorts of problems. Things go badly wrong, and things can just sort of disintegrate into chaos, and you might not be able to get back. So that goes back to what I was saying. You need to keep things simple. Don't move outside your comfort zone. Don't take risks. It's that kind of weekend. Now, got two moving lines. That does mean that we move to a second hexagram, and the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 50, a rather different energy, the cauldron. The cauldron is about taking everything that we are, everything that we can be, and sort of distilling it. And so perhaps we start the weekend being sort of quite restrained, and we look at what we can do, we look at what we can't do, we look at our various abilities, and we have abilities. One aspect we have over the weekend, there is Mercury conjunct Venus, so it's not exact, but Mercury-Venus conjunctions can be very talented and can be about what we do well, and that's one of the things we put into the cauldron. And so with this cauldron is talking about honesty. knowing about our limits, but we don't want to miss anything. And so that might be like kind of how we end the weekend, having a sense of what we are and who we are and what we can be, but not necessarily acting on it immediately. It just might be work in progress. And I want to finish by considering sort of Aquarius Overdrive. Now, a lot of people have been talking about all these planets in Aquarius. You look at YouTube videos, people are just saying, this is just incredibly dramatic, and something that is like life-changing. End of an era. Yeah, I've kind of talked about the end of an era. It's always easy with astrology to hype things up. I mean, in a sort of YouTube sense, you're supposed to get people's attention. Isn't that what it's all about? Using the right words. It doesn't matter what you're doing. So there is this pressure to get people to watch your videos, and I don't know, I'm not very good at it, but it's what people do. It seems to me to be a bit crass. So yeah, Aquarius Overdrive, I mean, to me that's just a bit of an exaggeration, really. So as far as all these planets in Aquarius are concerned, I just wanted to think about what we have and why it might be exceptional to an extent. So we've got 5 planets in Aquarius, and we don't have any Earth at the moment. Now, the thing about not having any planets in Earth, of course, the moon is a fast mover. So the moon will move in and out of the signs. Every couple of days the moon will change sign. So for example, the beginning of a weekend, there are no planets in Earth signs, and so that's the weekend chart. Let me just put Aries on the on the left. So that's a weekend's chart. So the beginning of the weekend, there are no planets in Earth signs. Okay, Uranus is in an Earth sign, but when you're doing the elemental count, you don't count Uranus. And it looks as if we got true black moon Lilith in Capricorn. Maybe that's something I should have talked about. God, it's got into Capricorn. Maybe that's something I need to consider. But the end of the weekend, moon does move into Taurus. So every now and then we do have a moon moving into Taurus. But aside from the moon, we are moving in through a fairly lengthy period of time when there's nothing in Earth. Again, except for Uranus in Taurus. So that happened when Mars moved out of Aquarius and into out of Capricorn and into Aquarius. And we don't get any planets in Earth signs except for the moon until, is it the spring? I think it's not until what's the next planet to move into an Earth sign? Well, I think it's going to be it could be. Let me just see. I think it's we have. Sorry about this. So yeah, I mean the Sun moves into Taurus obviously on the 21st of April. Venus. So Venus moves into Taurus on March the 31st. So that's when, if you like, the Earth drought ends. So until the end of March, which is over 2 months, there are no planets in Earth signs, and so that might mean that there is something slightly extreme about what's going on astrologically, but that extremity is at its peak now, between now and February the 10th. So you might think that the Aquarius principle is going to be strong, and Aquarius without anything in Earth, except for when the moon flips in and out of it could be quite ungrounded, and it could be just about sort of ideas getting out of control. I think that might be a way of thinking about it. Aquarius, the air sign, having ideas about perhaps organizing society. We can create we can create a society which is perhaps perfect. Of course, that's not possible. Ideas about how governments might have ideas about how things can be run, and as individuals, we mustn't get fixated on our ideas. We can have an idea about the way things are going to work out with this planet with all these planets in Aquarius, and it can be just quite rigid. We just think, oh, it's going to work out like this, and with no planets in Earth, we can act in a way that really is completely ungrounded, really ungrounded, and so that might be the source, perhaps, of a mistake, and so it's going to be very important, for all of us, to be flexible. We can have convictions, but we also have to monitor what's going on around us and always ask, do the facts support our ideas? And if they don't support our ideas, perhaps we need to make changes. We don't want to be like a juggernaut. I mean, that can be the problem, with having all of those 5 planets in Aquarius. But going back to this concept of hyperbole, is it really such a big deal that 5 planets are in Aquarius? I mean, it's not like it's never happened before. I mean, it has happened before. In fact, I'm going to just show you a chart of someone who has got 7 planets in Aquarius. Someone who has all of the traditional planets in Aquarius. And so, what kind of person, might that be? So looking at, what people were saying at the beginning of February 1962, they were certainly very, very excited about having 5 planets in Aquarius, and so if we look at some of the commentary for this, so for example, quoting from sort of Wikipedia, Gnostic philosopher Samuel Orne Weir declared February the 4th to be the beginning of the Age of Aquarius, heralded by the alignment of the first 6 planets, the Sun, the Moon, and the constellation Aquarius. That's what he said. So first 6, well, in fact, there were 7 planets. I mean, Sun, Moon, everything. I mean, Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. They were all there. So I think that this was the source of the Aquarius myth. I think it is a myth, because reality is the Age of Aquarius does not start, at the very least, until AD 2379. I mean, it may be later. You could argue that it actually starts centuries later than that. But, we are not in the Age of Aquarius. I'll probably need to put a video about that and should explain why we're not in the Age of Aquarius. But it's a kind of the self-centeredness of the times in which we are living. We want to be alive when something wonderful happens, the dawning of the Age of Aquarius. So, 1962, February the 4th, 1962, supposedly the Age of Aquarius starts, and then at the end of the decade you have in the late 60s you have hair, and this is the dawning of the Age of Aquarius and all of that kind of stuff. And that is perhaps the myth of Aquarius. And thinking about what other people were saying, and there was another psychic, a psychic called Jean Dixon, and again, according to Wikipedia, according to famous psychic Jean Dixon, a child was born somewhere in the Middle East who would revolutionize the world and eventually unite all warring creeds and sects into one all-embracing faith, and who would bring peace on earth by 1999. The prediction, which did not come true as scheduled, was published in A Gift of Astrology, the 1965 biography of Dixon by Ruth Montgomery. So that is the idea that someone special could have been born. I mean, it might still be born, but, it didn't happen in 1999. This person is now 60, is about to turn 64. For myself, I wasn't born in February 1962. I was still waiting to be born. I wasn't born until May the 30th of May 1962. So here's the question: what would happen if you had 7 planets in Aquarius? Would you be the Antichrist? Would you be the savior? So here is a chart which I haven't looked at before, which I haven't shown before, of someone who was born on February the 4th, 1962. And he's a man called Clint Black. And we even have a time of birth for him. Now, I don't really know much about Clint Black. Maybe you know about him. So, Clint Black, super Aquarian. I mean, look at these planets in Aquarius. He has got everything. On February the 4th, we even have a time of birth for him, 7:30 p.m. He was born in New Jersey. And he has Mars, Saturn, Sun. He was born around the time of a new moon, born on the time of born on the time of an eclipse, and Mercury, Venus, South Node, a really special time to be born. Now, I looked at his Wikipedia page, and he's very successful. He's a country singer. He lives in Nashville. He lives with his wife in Nashville. He appears to have a very, very high work ethic, and he always has. I mean, he performs regularly. You go to his website. You can see the schedule of his performances. He's an incredibly hard worker. I get the impression that he married his wife in 1991. They have a child. There are no divorces. His behavior is completely perfect. I mean, in a way, he kind of represents this sort of the American work ethic. And yeah, he's been playing in bands since he was 13, and nothing has happened. There's no scandal, nothing. He's famous in his field. If you're into country music, and if you live in Nashville, Tennessee, you'll know who he is, I assume. But if you're not outside there, I don't think he's an international star or anything like that. And that is 7 planets in Aquarius. So what is that all about? Well, a lot of those planets are in it's difficult now because you see he's got so many planets in Aquarius that the chart is beginning to break down. But he's certainly got 5 planets in the 6th house. He's got a Mars-Saturn conjunction as well. So Mars-Saturn conjunction, you might think about all sorts of problems of having a Mars-Saturn conjunction, but in his case, Mars-Saturn can be very hard-working. It can be quite into music, and if he's got any frustrations, he's able to throw it into his music, and it's all very straightforward. And so from a whole sign perspective, certainly he's got all of those planets in the 6th house, and maybe just that's what it's about. This is a chart of just 6th house, well organized, working hard. He has a busy schedule, and he just always does the right thing, and it's just really very straightforward. I think he's a Christian, and so we're talking about Antichrist or anything like that. No, he's just a quietly very successful person. And you might say that with all those 7 planets in Aquarius, well, it's a fixed sign. He decides on a course, and he just pursues it, and that's what Aquarius is all about. And so, when we're thinking about all of these planets in Aquarius and how incredible it is, maybe it's not that incredible. I mean, as far as events taking place on that weekend, I think the 4th, I believe the 4th was a Sunday, so the 5th of February was a Monday. Culturally there were some events of something important happened with the Beatles, by the way. So it says on, I think this was on Monday the 5th, where I believe there were 7 planets in Aquarius. It says, hours before the Beatles were scheduled to play at the Cavern Club, this is the 5th. Yeah, I think 7 planets were in Aquarius. Drummer Pete Best told his fellow musicians that he was ill and would be unable to appear. Determined not to cancel the show, the group called around for a replacement, and Ringo Starr, whose group had the day off, appeared in Best's place. So perhaps in terms of popular culture and the 60s, that was a huge event. You know, who knows? You know, butterflies' wings and all of that. I mean, I don't know, you know, anything really about Pete Best, but maybe Ringo Starr and becoming part of the Beatles. You know, that was the key moment. When you think about the chemistry between 4 charts, moving Pete Best out, moving Ringo Starr in, just could have made all the difference in terms of the Beatles' eventual success. So that would very much link with the 60s and the Beatles with this fantastic success they obviously had during that decade. So that was perhaps a 7 planets in Aquarius event. You know, there weren't any wars. Okay, we had the We had the Cuba Missile Crisis, I think later, you know, at the end of 1962. But it was, you know, what I'm trying to say is that we probably shouldn't necessarily get too excited about 5 planets in Aquarius, because we saw what happened when 7 planets were in Aquarius at the beginning of 1962. Sure, there's always important events, but I wouldn't have said that there were any devastating events. So I'm kind of, you know, ending this video in a rather sort of anticlimactic way. It's maybe just something that we shouldn't get too excited about, this Aquarian Overdrive, and maybe it's just a bit of noise, and we should perhaps avoid hyperbole. So anyway, thank you very much for watching this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.